All right, well, let me welcome you to, I think this is the 18th session, because it's June, in this series on speculative fiction, called Worlds of Speculative Fiction, where what we're looking at is in part narrative worlds, but usually also philosophical themes. And so this time we're looking at, I'm not sure if it's pronounced Ian or Ian. I actually looked it up online and people said both. So I'm just going to say Ian because that's easy for me to remember. Iain Banks and these culture series books. I've got two of them here and I see some other ones around. Big, thick novels, which presented a bit of a problem for me, in part because the normal tack that I would take of focusing on a plot and characters, you can't do that when you're talking about this narrative universe, in part because it's all about, I suppose if there's a character, it's a culture, this massive organization, but it's trillions of human beings spread out over millennia. So that's
close that.
Yeah, that almost sounds like we're at the pool.
School's out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But so this is another one of the suggestions. I'm really glad that you suggested it because I really have enjoyed what I've had the chance to read. I only have read the first two novels, unfortunately, but it's good because we have a pool of expertise on some of the others here. I don't have as many notes prepared as usual. I do have the timeline as usual. And Banks died pretty recently, so we'll talk a bit about his biography. I've got some interesting quotes where he's talking about the culture series. I thought that would be particularly useful. We'll be talking about his politics and what he thinks about science fiction in general. And then I've got 6 themes that I thought were particularly stand out in his work, but we can certainly talk about others. And so one of them is this whole idea of post-scarcity society and technology leading us to that. It's particularly timely because there's a lot of discussion right now about, we were actually just talking about this before we started, about what AI can be delegated to do, in terms of our crafts and our skills. And we do have to think about this pressing question of what are we going to do when there isn't work for a lot of the population? How are we going to handle that as a society? So that's one thing. Genetic enhancement and what that does to the human condition, I think, is another interesting theme. When you get people who can produce their own drugs in their brains, that's very different. This whole thing about AI minds and then the other types of AIs, the drones, and this whole, you might say, whole new set of beings created to be part of that society that have certain, rights and expectations. That's an interesting theme. The politics in the culture itself, which we don't actually get to see that much of. We see mostly what's happening at the periphery of it, but we get to hear a bit about what's going on, in their deliberations and how they split off from each other. That's another one. And then I was really struck by this dynamic that you see, this need for what they call the contact group, which are the people that are doing the dirty work, in essence, right? The stuff dealing with the people who are not part of the utopia, dealing with all this, and then especially special circumstances, which is their military intelligence arm. And then one of the themes that came up in Player of Games that I thought was particularly interesting is this notion of how games interface with reality. And I'm not just talking about virtual reality stuff, escaping into a matrix or something like that. In this, there's a game that is deciding who gets to be in charge. And it's supposed to be sort of a fair game at replicating certain conditions, and then the cream rises to the top. Sort of like the story that we tell about a lot of different things. And it turns out that's not actually the case, but there's some interesting corollaries there. So those are the themes I thought about. I think we'll probably have a lot more, what about this, what about that, than in some of the other cases. in part because I'm much more at the amateur level when it comes to this particular narrative universe. So let's talk very briefly about his biography. You see that, he was born in 54, so if he were around today, which he was until recently, he would be in his 60s. He's born in Scotland, and I don't really know Scottish geography or culture enough to make sense of the references to East and West Scotland and why the move made such a big difference. But that's one of the things that Banks actually does talk about, the fact that moving from this side to that side. And he goes to the University of Stirling, which eventually gave him an honorary degree. Very nice thing to do, I suppose. He gets a BA in English, philosophy, and psychology. So he's already spread out over a number of different fields. And then he works through a bunch of different jobs. Some of them, like collecting garbage. Some of them clerking in a law office. Just, the things that kind of fill in the time. And he's writing constantly. And in that early part of his career, like quite a few of the people we've talked about, he's getting a lot of rejection letters, which seems to be the case for a lot of innovative science fiction and fantasy. And he stuck with it, keeps writing, and eventually he publishes this book, The Wasp Factory, in '84, which I haven't read. Have any of you read it?
I've read about it.
Okay.
I haven't had the chance to read it.
Yeah, from what I've read about it, it seems like quite a ride, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A distinctly British grotesque style, I was told.
Yeah.
Well, it's like kind of humor, but kind of sick humor, and also horror and psychological stuff.
Yeah. I wonder if, one of the people we talked about last year was Mervyn Peake, and I wonder if there's any...
yeah, the person who
similarities?
Introduced me to it liked Gormenghast for the same reasons. So.
Oh. Well, that'll be interesting then. So that's his first book that he published. He's quite successful with that. He meets his first wife, Annie, becomes a full-time writer. They move to Faversham, and then you notice he's like clockwork, just churning out a book a year, most years. The first book in the Culture series, and I put the ones in the Culture series in dark so that you can tell where they are, is in '87. That's Consider Phlebas, which I misspoke as Remember Phlebas earlier. And Player Games comes out, fairly soon after that. And interestingly, from what I found out about his writing process, he likes to get the books done fairly quickly so that he has plenty of time to not write, to do other things instead. And he liked the pace of one book a year because he could, get his writing done in maybe, if he's really lucky, in 2 or 3 months, maybe 6 months. And then the rest of the time he can drive around in his cars. He collected, sports cars and fancy cars and things like that, and drink whiskey and smoke cigars and in general enjoy himself, which sounds like a pretty good life, actually. Writing half the time and then doing fun stuff the rest of the time. And you see, year after year, he produces book after book. He starts winning awards. There's some back and forth in his personal relationship with Annie. He breaks up with her, gets back together with her, marries her. Eventually they're going to separate down the line. And they're going to separate after he meets the woman who would become his late wife, Adele. Begins a relationship with her. And you notice that he also, well, I didn't put too much of the political stuff in here, but he gets involved in quite a few causes. He's on the left, and he, for instance, opposes apartheid, and he gets involved with some things having to do with the Palestinians and the Israelis. He also winds up, for example, resigning his membership of the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society after there's a commercial takeover, right? So he's against that. He campaigned to get Tony Blair impeached after the beginning of the Gulf War, and he's going along pretty well. It was cancer that did him in the end. He has gallbladder cancer, and I don't think there's an awful lot at this point. they can do about that, right? It's one of those sort of like pancreatic or stomach cancer. Yeah. I mean, down the line, it's one of the things we can talk about with this culture thing. Down the line, hopefully, all of this stuff will get sorted out. But
we're just talking about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. About which diseases will go next, or
How long it'll take for it to get there.
yeah,
We're all screwed, but
well, we are. Yeah, there's nothing we can do.
Maybe a generation from now, different story.
Yeah, I mean, you
Download.
think about the progress that's been made just in our lifetimes. My dad died when I was 11, so in the 80s, and during that time we spent a lot of time in the hospital because they never figured out what it was. He went to the Mayo Clinic and they did lots of tests and stuff like that. And you think about, well, if it was today, maybe they would have figured it out like that. Who knows? There's so many things where 30 years ago you were a goner, and now things are treatable. And then there's other things that'll still kill you pretty quickly now. But so that's kind of a good segue into talking about this universe that he creates, which is a universe that right now fits into, because in the storyline it's overlapping with the time period that we're living in. And Earth is discussed a little bit in some of the stories, just tangentially. So I've got these quotes, and I think we could start with these, because these give us kind of a good picture. The first one is he was asked to give sort of a summary of what's going on with this culture. And here he's talking about its utopian characteristics. But I think we should probably preface this by saying, so the culture is spread throughout the galaxy. It doesn't control the entire galaxy, but it controls a lot of it. And they have gone so far along with technology that they're no longer just bound to planets. They create these other living, what would you call them, habitations. Like you can have a ring around a sun. There's spheres. What else are there? There's a whole bunch of different things. The orbitals.
The orbitals.
Yeah. And if you do something like that, you can pack a ton of people in, and they don't all have to live on top of each other, which some people like, but a lot of people don't. And you can have all sorts of green space and oceans and whatever you like on these places, and in fact they do. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So he says the culture is a self-consciously altruistic and utopian post-scarcity human-machine civilization. That's already a big mouthful right there. Existing as an important and influential but far from dominant part of a greater galactic meta-society. It's a mongrel society formed about 9,000 years from seven or eight humanoid species and their AIs. It exists now. Earth was discovered in 1977 CE and fully documented, that we're being left alone for the moment as part of a control group. So the culture is a functioning utopia, or as close to anything remotely human can get to a utopia, and it's dedicated to interfering in less developed civilizations for their own good, naturally. So you've got not only the utopian aspect of things, but you've also got this kind of cultural imperialism going on at the same time as well, right? Because everybody always knows better when they're interfering with somebody else. So he says it'll inundate you with a mind-bogglingly extensive and comprehensive range of statistics and other evidence should you question whether this is a good idea or not. Because they're doing all the research. They've got people they've what would you call it, the numbers on their side, because they can just throw 100,000 people at this one problem to work at it, and a whole bunch of AIs to work on it as well, and the people will actually want to work on it. And so he says it's been doing this for most of those 9,000 years. It's the main thing that it does beyond itself, and it claims to have gotten very good at it. Mostly, and so here's the key thing, mostly the culture consists of tens of trillions of people and machines having a brilliant, guilt-free time, but that would be boring to write about and read about. So I tend to concentrate on the interesting stuff happening at the edges where the exciting adventures and big explosions tend to lurk. He had this one with a big explosion, almost like something in an action movie. And so what he's created there is, for a narrative world, it's like a gigantic playground. Anything is possible. Somebody actually asked him in another interview, did you get some of this stuff from Ray Kurzweil and the, singularity? And he said, no, I was thinking about that before him, independently of him. I was just trying to think this out of my own. But it's an interesting. It poses some interesting problems because. So all of the stuff that we tend to struggle with, like mortgages and paying our taxes, and what the economy is going to look like 10 years from now, and should I go to school or not go to school, and all that that's all taken care of. You can be anything you want, and you can even be things that you don't have a real aptitude for, because there's no consequences to you failing at doing things, right? So if I don't have a lot of musical talent, I could still be a singer and hang out in cafes, and people could come listen to me, perhaps ironically,
Think of those karaoke bars.
We do have them.
Yeah, or open mic night, I suppose, right? Some places. But, so there's that. But then the question is, well, okay, so what do you do? So, the way in which it gets talked about quite a bit is the culture is a hedonistic civilization. It's devoted to pleasures. And if you think about it, if we didn't have to do all the BS that we have to do in order to make a living, in order to provide for kids and keep the government off our back and all the other stuff that we need to do, how would we spend our time? What would we enjoy doing? That's the key question that a lot of these people have to figure out. And it doesn't seem like a hard question for those of us who actually do work a lot, because we don't spend a lot of time thinking about what are our pleasures. But if you did have 24/7, okay, do whatever you want. Anything that you want to have, we can provide to you. Eventually, you start to have to struggle. You have to figure, well, what do I actually like? I mean, think about food, right? So if you could have whatever you wanted to eat, and there weren't any real consequences like getting fat or being bad for your veins or things like that, what would you select? And some people, I'll have lobster every night. Well, lobster gets boring pretty quick. There's only so many things you can do with lobster. Start my dinners with dessert. I had an uncle who used to do that. He said you should have the best part first. But you could have meals that are just desserts, right? But eventually you're going to get kind of bored with that.
But don't you think, I think you're reacting in a sense that this is like a switch, but it happens gradually.
Yeah, that's true.
And
they're born into it.
We are already,
yeah.
We're looking at this or any other world as sort of a, open the blinds or whatever, and it all looks immediately and significantly different and challenging, and wow, how do they do these things? But we are already doing these things gradually. Choices of food or whatever, and choices of transportation, any machine things that are done for us. They're not all machines, but there is a we're not toiling in the fields as maybe 100 years ago.
It wouldn't be much different as our great-grandparents opening a door and seeing what we are today.
Yeah. Well, this is going to sound kind of silly, this example, but I remember encountering tacos, and they weren't really great tacos. They were just the Ortega taco shells with the same 4 ingredients, the meat, the cheese, tomatoes, and lettuce, at a 9th birthday party for the neighbor when I was 10 years old. And it was mind-blowing. We never had anything like that. We had spaghetti and we had this and that. And my mom was a great cook, but tacos took the neighborhood by storm. Nobody had tacos. It was a new thing. And now, of course, we look back at that and we're like, well, those aren't very good tacos, what were we thinking? But it was, like you said, I guess that metaphor of pulling the blinds, that's really a good one.
But I think another point, too, is that we place a higher value or a greater value on something that we invest from ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So when we
Yeah.
get a lot of things conveniently or quickly, we say, oh, isn't this great? But we're losing something that we're not maybe taking note of. I think when
Yeah.
I was for a short time in East Africa, and where both parties could speak English. I was, anyhow, one of and I heard some questioning, and one of the ladies said, "Is it true?" Kind of hushed tones, that in America that wives and mothers, they have machines to make bread.
Oh,
And
yeah.
why would they want
They
that?
go
It was
through
just they had
Yeah,
a
yeah.
fundamental purpose in providing nutrition
Yeah.
and hands-on, for their families.
Yeah.
And they could not conceive why you would not want that,
Yeah.
I mean, just as an example. I mean,
No, I think that's completely right. That's one of the issues that societies like that eventually have to grapple with, because it's not just producing bread to sell it to somebody else or something like that. This gives me my purpose, and it's like you said, you're putting something of yourself into it, right?
Yeah,
So-
and the key thing is, where's your meaning and purpose as an
Yeah.
individual, as a group, as a culture?
Yeah.
And so when you have a lot of these other things that all of a sudden are done, you lose some of that meaning and purpose, and then you turn to what we call hedonism. And then maybe when does it flip back and
Yeah.
say, hey, all this is without meaning and value and purpose. We need to do something different that I invest in. I have some skin in the game, and I can get something back out of participating in the process. I
Yeah.
don't know.
That's a good point, though, because
Yeah.
I would say that's probably one of the driving points of player games. Is the lead in there has basically lost. It's not, nothing's interesting anymore, and then he is given this opportunity to do something that's far outside his comfort zone. Because yes, everything has become commonplace.
Yeah.
He always wins. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if he wants to see his friends who live halfway across this orbital, you just get in a underground magnetic car, you're there a half hour later, as opposed to it taking 6 years or however long it would take to travel to another part of a.
Well, the whole thing about the contact group, those are all people who are choosing to be on the fringes of the culture, dealing with other civilizations, because there's something happening, and they can do something. And there's also some of them are kind of thrill seekers too. So there's a chance you could get killed, which is probably not going to happen in the rest of the culture because there's no crime or anything like that.
Well, they have technology too that you could jump off of a
Yeah, it
building, and
protects
if
them.
they could just even just preserve the brain itself, they can build everything.
That's
back.
true. Yeah, yeah. And they have, what was it called? This device you keep on you all the time.
the soul keeper.
Oh, that backs you up?
Well, no, the one, it'll get you out of trouble basically.
Oh.
Some drone will come by and take care of you.
Oh, yeah.
Like a little communicator or something.
Yeah, there's a special-
Like Life
yeah.
Alert. This is
Yeah,
really
yeah, it is like
serious
Life
now.
Alert.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
like some wear them as a brooch and some as
Only
a
the drone can
necklace.
pretty
and-
much destroy
the
a planet.
Yeah.
The hub
Okay.
connection.
Oh, yeah, the hub
Surface to
connection.
The
tail,
hub
you have
connection.
the neural net that microscopically intertwines with your whole brain, and if
Yeah.
you're dead, it just downloads you down to the molecule. So that's
Well, look, the
interesting
Windward
question.
has that. They have
Yeah.
the thing
Yeah.
Is
they
that you?
Yeah.
call the soul keeper.
That was the main character.
Oh, well, that's a good.
Before
That's
we
actually
die,
a good theme to talk
it
about
downloads-
too when we get to the philosophical themes. What is your personal identity?
Mhm.
This is reminding me of a different series where they had a protected your brain, but obviously you'd still die. Just a copy of you would live. And not to spoil the series, but it ends with the protagonist facing his own death and realizing he's actually going to die. He meets his copy, and it's kind of a bittersweet thing.
Oh.
But
okay.
I can't remember who wrote it. And it wasn't him because it follows the same character through multiple books.
So there's this audiobook that I'm listening to right now called "We Are Legion, We Are Bob." I don't know if anyone.
No.
It's fantastic. It's like this sort of comedy drama science fiction that's amazing. It's about this guy who sells his internet company in our time and makes like $600 million and does all this crazy stuff. And one of the things he does is signs up with this company that will cut off his head when he dies and freeze it. And I won't ruin the whole book because this is only the beginning. Turns out he then goes to Vegas to a sci-fi conference and gets hit by a car, and they cut off his head and freeze it. And he wakes up 117 years later, but The problem is they still can't revive his brain. His brain is just this puddle on the floor, and they scanned it into a computer instead.
Oh, okay.
And they have several backup copies of him, and the mainframe gets destroyed, and then he gets rebooted, and he's like, well, what am I? It's like,
Yeah.
it seemed like a smooth series of events, but
Yeah. I mean, there's other things that come up in other series where, like,
It seems to be ongoing lately in a lot of the Black Mirror series on Netflix.
about personal
Oh, yeah.
identity.
San Junipero?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
well, it's interesting. It's interesting. If you replace
Yeah.
yourself all at once with an AI, is that you?
If you download
What
it,
about
is
if
that
you
you?
replace yourself a little bit at a time?
That's like the old
Is
adage
that any
about,
different?
about the broom.
Yeah, well, that's the
Yeah.
ship of Theseus problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Orphan Black looks at it a little differently too.
Yeah.
Cloning.
Well,
It's the same clone, but it's different people.
Yeah, and the question is how much, there's two questions. How much does environment affect it, and then where does free will enter in? Let's talk about the second thing.
And then value of life,
Yeah,
too.
Yeah.
that's Zakalway.
So when he was asked, why did you write the Culture series, and why does it have the shape that it has, he said, it was in reaction to a lot of the sci-fi I was reading at the time. Now, this is kind of common when people are like, well, I'm not happy with what there is, so I'll do my own thing. The British stuff seemed mostly miserabilist, and the U.S. is too right-wing. I wanted sci-fi that combined what I regarded as the best of both, the thoughtfulness and sense of proportion of the UK's, and the energy and optimism of the U.S. brand. So that's an interesting mix right there. So he says, the way the Culture came about initially was, as I thought at the time, a single-use solution to a particular problem. I was getting ready to write use of weapons, and I knew that Zakalway was this sort of ultimate warrior guy, but I wanted him to be on the side of the good guys somehow. So I came up with the idea of the Culture as his ultimate employers. They're the good guys, but they employ this guy who's kind of a bad guy. Why? Because they need him to do, as he's saying it here, it's dirty but justified work, and that's one of the key themes that runs throughout these novels. This question of what's actually justified, is the ethical concerns. So he says that was it initially, but then the Culture proved to be the nucleus around which all my other work until then, rather nebulous ideas started to cluster and take shape, and it developed. Naturally, it felt by itself from there. And then the next passage, they asked him, well, are you ever going to be done with this? And he said, no. I mean, think about it. Once you create something like that, you just keep on making more and more and more. So he said, I decided right from the start to resist the temptation to tear it all down at any point, and this has become sort of indicative and symbolic of the nature and demeanor of the Culture itself. It means to resist completion and put off subliming, which would be sort of rising to a higher level, so that it can keep on going, sticking around in the real and trying to do good as it sees it for as long as it can. And it's already envisaging that when it finally does fade away, it'll be when it's going will hardly be noticed, because being something like the Culture will be pretty much the default state for all galactic civilizations. And then he says, I keep things fresh by finding new things to write about. Sometimes these come from brand new ideas, and he gives a few examples of that. And then sometimes it comes from throwaway ideas, single words in earlier novels, and he gives examples. The air sphere is mentioned in Phoebus turning up and Look to Windward. If you think about a book this long, there's probably stuff he could have mined in here for decades afterwards, right? And it's pretty ingenious. It shows you some of his what would you call it, his planning that's involved in this. We've used this distinction that comes up in fantasy literature between architects and gardeners, that with Tolkien being sort of the paradigm of an architect, somebody who plans everything out, has the whole storyboards, invents languages. Who else would have been?
Heinlein would have been that way.
Yeah. Somebody else that we did recently, though, where they created whole descriptions of almost like anthropological stuff of
McCaffrey did that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
McCaffrey did it.
And then gardeners, they plant stuff, and there's something actually there, but then they see what happens with it. And sometimes it like chokes off the other plants. Sometimes they have to weed it. Sometimes it blooms well. And George R. Martin's an example of that. He doesn't actually know when he's doing things just how things are going to turn out, and he's sometimes pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised, as are we his readers. Debatable whether he actually completely knows where the Song of Ice and Fire is going. He says he does, but we don't know until it comes out.
I find it interesting that he thought that at the time U.S. science fiction was too right-wing. Because on this side of the pond, people saw it as too left-wing.
Well,
you had Star Trek where you have a white man kissing a black woman,
yeah.
and you have a black woman as an officer on a starship, and you have that was all seen as pretty radically
so we're looking
socialist.
At like the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Star Trek
Science
world began in the
fiction
60s.
Yeah.
Late
By
60s.
then we've got space operas, like Battlestar Galactica, which is that's
Babylon 5.
that'd be much later, right? I think that's in the 90s.
the original Battlestar Galactica.
The original Battlestar Galactica was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's in the 70s, and then Buck Rogers,
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been
Flash
30s and
Gordon.
40s. That was 30s.
No, it was redone.
There was a
Oh, the
show.
reboot. The reboot.
But those are just shows, and then we'd have to think about like who's on the scene and who's churning books out in the written stuff. Yeah, I mean, Asimov wasn't super productive by then. Heinlein was. Heinlein was like churning out a couple books a year.
What would you call it?
He was pretty leftist.
Yeah, very.
He was pretty leftist, yeah.
Who else in America was really cranking stuff out?
Butler was writing in the 70s,
80s, I think.
80s, 70s and 80s.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there being a lot of sort of like one-off, kind of not very.
McCaffrey was
Good
A bunch
writing.
of Asimov is all I remember reading.
McCaffrey
Well, I think a
was,
lot of the stuff that we were reading had been written like in the 50s, 60s,
I think
and
it was
70s.
more
you know?
60s type. It had a tint to it.
Yeah,
McCaffrey was writing heavily in the 70s.
yeah.
Andre Norton was writing heavily. Mercedes Lackey,
Okay.
Marion Zimmer Bradley, Ursula Leguin.
Yeah.
They were all writing, and they were
Yeah,
all
Leguin
pretty.
definitely was. And
they're all-
Zelazny, too.
Yeah, Zelazny.
Yeah.
They're all pretty.
Yeah,
They're not
he's
real
kind
right.
of.
They're not real right wing.
Maybe he's,
But did
maybe
he
he's
mean
referring.
libertarian when he was saying?
I don't think so. I don't
I
know.
think he's talking about certain like hardliner military sci-fi.
Sci-fi, yeah.
Is my gut
Maybe he's
feeling.
talking about not so much the author, but what was in the content.
Well, the
Yeah.
content was pretty socialist.
Well, going out killing aliens for being weird.
I mean,
That was
Fritz-
started a lot. Oh, it was
Fritz
an
Saberhagen would have been in there around that time. Ben
um,
Bova was writing a lot of stuff. Their stuff was a lot of like, let's shoot the aliens, you know.
Yeah, what was that one?
Ben Bova was tended to be
Yeah.
more like, in some ways, like Asimov. You know, science will predominate. Those stupid masses out there, you know, keep them away from the ship. That sort of thing. Because before they wreck it all.
Got a little Banksy later on though, because
Starship Troopers was written around that time. That was
That's
Yes.
earlier, wasn't
That was
it?
Heinlein too, wasn't it?
That's Heinlein.
Yeah.
yeah.
He was late 50s, mid 60s.
Mid 60s.
Yeah.
Stranger in a Strange Land was 61. It was
Well, yeah, it's
one-
definitely not
Yeah.
right now, you know.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. That went another way.
Yeah.
So I wonder what
With
he
Ursula's
meant.
children.
Well,
I'm kind of confused by a couple of things because I'm like, the gardener tends his garden. Is the gardener altruistic?
with who? With respect to his characters?
With reference to the Culture series. Like he says, the culture is self-consciously altruistic.
Yeah.
I didn't really. I saw their self-perception as being altruistic, but I saw their actions as being
Well, which
Almost-
meditated
almost
and imperialism.
imperialistic,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because
Well, they think
here's our perception
Yeah.
of what's right. We'll help you get there.
Well, what happened?
That's what we
was-
call
not
that's what we
really-
call paternalistic,
It's
right?
See, let's give you that.
Yeah.
So it's
give you that.
it's viewed as, I mean, they're viewing it, like you said, as altruistic because they know what's really good for these people over there. You know, like for example, in Player of Games, right? There's this weird civilization, and it's very stratified. Everybody's got their place, totally unlike the culture, right? So they're going to fix that, you know?
Well, you have that
See,
look-
that's it. That's where
Yeah.
altruism changes to paternalism. But
Yeah,
the person who's being paternalistic probably sees themselves as altruistic.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting because
Well, look to Windward is the same way. You've got a caste system that the culture decides that they can make it better and fix it, and they end up creating a civil war.
Exactly.
And millions
Exactly.
of people get killed.
Well, I just wonder if there's ever any true altruism. Altruism. Is there really anything that you're not getting something from on some level?
Warm
That there's
fuzzies.
true, altruism. I thought about that for a very long time.
I think it's based on perception.
Yeah, there's a book that was out years and years ago, the 70s, Robert Ringer, Looking Out for Number One.
Oh,
His
yeah.
philosophy was, there is no such thing as true altruism.
Well, that's what I was
Everybody's
thinking.
out to get something.
Well,
And it might
paternalism-
be what you're out to get is
A good
people liking you.
feeling.
Yeah.
Are,
Right.
you know,
I mean, you're always
but you're
going to
out
get
to
something
get
from
something.
it.
Everybody's
At
out
a
to
certain
get
point,
something.
that winds up getting incoherent, though. I mean, if you push it far enough, you have to stretch it so that, like, the good of the other person that you're clearly striving for becomes what you're really about, the warm fuzzy or something like that. And you do see, they're not common cases, but you do see cases where people behave in very altruistic ways.
Well,
It may not be perfectly altruistic, but that doesn't mean that there isn't any altruism.
But when you create a civil war in an entire society,
Oh,
you
yeah.
don't get to call yourself altruistic.
Yeah.
Well, paternalism
I mean-
gets a bad rap. Maybe not.
Are you going to
I was
defend
going to
it?
say in
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I was going to say in this
Because
book,
it's not what you would think. Medicine used to be paternalistic.
I mean, it still is sometimes.
It's not. You can either have paternalistic medicine, which is where you went to your doctor and you
Yeah.
said, this is what you should do, and that's the end of it. And you are really sick, and you're going to die. You probably shouldn't do any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And things didn't cost much, and people didn't suffer needlessly. Or you can have the lawyers and the business people run it,
Yeah. And make
Which is
autonomy
what it is
the
now.
crime. Patient autonomy
which
the
is
crime
what it is
value.
now,
Yeah.
and it's a cluster.
Yeah.
And not, I would say, providing the ideal outcomes.
Do you think that there's still some areas within American medicine where it still winds up being paternalistic, like when you have to make triage?
The best of it
Oh, yeah.
is.
Well, I was going to say, like,
The
in
best
the
of it
emergency
is.
room triage
There are
determinations.
some
Yeah.
old horsemen out there who are the last one.
I would take exception to that, because I wouldn't say the best, because I've run into doctors who are paternalistic by character, who were obnoxious people
Well,
who,
you can see. you can
they were
see-
right,
Well, we can make
you
a
had to do
distinction.
it their way.
I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm saying it was maybe in some ways better than what we have, but you can see how it got ruined.
We can make a distinction there, though, between, like, paternalistic because they really get a kick out of, like, telling people what to do, and then paternalistic because they're placed into a circumstance where they realize I'm the only person who actually does know what's going on. I think those are
The longer
very different.
The longer I practice,
attitudes.
the more paternalistic I become, because I've
Well,
seen it. I've seen it again
Yeah.
and again and again, and people want to know what you would do if you're in that situation. They don't want to be told, okay, well, we could do this, or we could do this,
Yeah.
or we could do this. So what do you want to do?
Yeah.
You know, that's
I'll say something similar to that came up in my experience in academic administration. And I never thought it would happen because, I thought all my peers were rational and people get things done and stuff like that.
Cute.
Yeah. And so I got involved in the thing that I actually got started is it turned out I was good at writing reports. So it came to the attention of the dean, and the dean was like, when we need to do a project, we're going to bring this guy in on it. And gradually I wound up with more and more, this was at one of my previous positions, more and more titles and duties and on a lot of committees. And I always entered in with this sort of notion like, well, everybody's rational, we'll get things done. And it very quickly became clear to me that a lot of my colleagues who were smart people, they'd sit around a table like this and like their brains would fall out.
Gridlock.
Yeah, and you'd be like, okay, so, we have to figure out what we're going to do to answer the assessors, so that the school can stay open and we can get federal funding. What are we going to do? And they'd be like, maybe we should, and after a certain point, you're like, all right, fine.
Here's what I'm going to do.
Exactly. Because, and you do it like out of frustration.
Well, in Accession, I'm glad you have that on the table there. Even these hyper-intelligent ship minds basically have that argument for 5 chapters of the book.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, it was
But actually,
it was great to read.
I was going to bring up the affronters and how the culture you can kind of feel themselves holding themselves back from interfering, because this is this utilitarian sinkhole where the environment is designed to cause maximum suffering because the affronters are sadists, basically.
Wow.
And the culture is and the culture is like, this feels really wrong, but I can't say anything. And yeah, it's kind of interesting. So here I was like, maybe they could have interceded a little more, but
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very brutal species, and they just kind of watch them do what they do. But the other element, the Accession, the thing that the plot is around, all these ships that have the minds of an entire planet behind them, so like 6 or 7 of them, they can't figure out what to do about this, and they do that. Well, maybe we should try this.
Well,
don't do that.
They throw their moderator out for being a little too paternalistic.
Moderator, another one of the minds? Or
He's sort of controlling the interesting
Yeah.
times gang.
Yeah.
And then
I read about
one of the
that,
minds
yeah.
is being really annoying, so they start, in modern terms, a new chat and lock him out of the chat room so they can proceed with business. So,
Well,
Very
let's
fun.
actually talk about that theme then of the AI minds
That's
and
the
what.
best one of all.
Do you like that? Yeah, I mean they're hyper intelligent. They're almost like godlike status, but not of course worshipped as gods. It's really an intriguing idea, and from a narrative perspective, it lets you cut out a lot of problems. This is one of the classic issues in sci-fi is you don't want to explain how hyperdrives work or any of that sort of thing. Right? And similarly, in explaining how a society functions, you don't want to explain too much, because that, on the one hand, it can be very boring for the reader, and on the other hand, if you do make it explicit, there's going to be somebody who's going to say, that's not how the science works. So the AI minds, what do you guys make of this notion of these super intelligent AI beings that at the same time don't take over and
They'd have
screw
to be
everything up?
altruistic, wouldn't they?
Well, they're designed that way, right? That's part of that's sort of built into it, almost sort of like Asimov gave a lot of thought to that, right? The 3 laws of robotics, right?
Although look to windward, Tesoro, the drone Tesoro, is very hedonistic, just like the humans. He's
There's a
in for-
hedonistic, or not a hedonistic drone, a sadistic drone in Player of Games,
Yeah.
too.
And he's not at all altruistic. He's in
Those
it
aren't the
for
minds. Those are just drones,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Those are at a lower level. They're like us. They're schmucks.
Yeah.
They're not running things.
Yeah.
gray
They're
area is an
connected to the
altruistic sadist.
Yeah,
They're all connected to the hub.
yeah.
I can't recall which book talked about it, and maybe one of you will remember. I think there was even a discussion amongst the minds, or someone asked a mind, then why do you even hang out with all of these?
Why are you slumming?
Yeah, why are you slumming? And one of the points was, well, they're kind of like neat pets. And then others were like, well, no, it's a little more involved than that. I can't recall the exact thing, but they find it interesting. If it weren't interesting, they would go do something else.
In Accession, at one point, they're spending their time in infinite fun space doing mathematical projections or whatever,
Yeah.
and they kind of begrudgingly have to protect surface reality, because if surface reality is wiped out or something, they can't play around anymore. So it's kind of like their day job.
What this reminds me of is there's a really interesting argument that was made in ancient philosophy by the Epicureans. And the Epicureans, they get known for being materialists, and they're all about pleasure and stuff like that. And usually they're seen as being atheists, but they did believe that there were gods. what was funny about what they thought about the gods was the gods had nothing to do whatsoever with human affairs or the universe, because if they did, they wouldn't be happy. The gods are blessed, and they're blessed precisely because they stay the hell out of every bit of business that they possibly can. And the minds could have done that, right? They could say, don't bother us with your nonsense, we're treated to pure mathematics or something like that. None of this messiness, none of this caring about human beings.
I think they like the messiness.
Well, there's where it gets interesting. So the messiness of human beings could provide an additional challenge that, say, pure mathematics wouldn't,
I like an exception too, that when they find out that someone's going ahead and doing something without talking about it, they're like, no, whoa, wait, but then they're like, but we can't stop. So at least they don't go from paternalism to imperialism. I mean, they could have stopped them.
I mean, let me shift the topic a little bit to the first theme. If let me ask all of you. So, if we could have a society that was run by, all the logistics are handled by these gigantic AIs that had it all figured out, and it's not going to be where we end up getting screwed over in the process or turned into, like the Matrix turned into batteries or anything like that. But they're really going to try to make our lives great. Would you pick that sort of thing? I think I probably would.
I don't know if you can guarantee it.
Yeah, if it was presented like
how would you guarantee that? That's the key.
With an off switch.
But we were having this discussion.
Well, the off switch would be in the other hand.
Sooner or later, they'd figure out how to disable the off switch.
Well, I've said this a couple times before. I still see AI as the next step in our evolution. I just do. At some point, we are going, like I said, download. We are, our consciousness, and it's going to be, we're no longer amoebas. I mean, we keep moving, and I just kind of see that down the road, we are not going to have as much relevance when you start getting things like that. What is going to be our purpose? At some point, we're going to have to stop reproducing, because I think we're going to work our way out, and this will be the next step toward gods or whatever you think the purpose of being here is. But I don't know. I just had, I guess, since I started reading Kurzweil all those years ago, and I just started thinking, for some reason, I just feel that that's going to be an eventual evolutionary step.
Would you miss having, let's say that actually does happen, would you miss having a body and the sort of bodily experiences,
I wouldn't know.
things,
I mean, I'm not going to be around then, but would I, if,
or feeling,
that,
taking a walk.
If you evolve to that point, you probably, I would say that as, something that's evolved from whatever to human. Do they miss, you don't know because you're somewhere else now.
You can put every neuron into a sensor that lets you sense things that you couldn't even imagine right now.
Plus, the minds,
it wouldn't be a blank space.
Yeah.
If you're going into a virtual reality, it's a different reality.
And that's what I think you lose. You think of virtual reality or 3D immersion,
Different
even 5 years from now or 10 years from now, as it relates to people watching football, pro football, or whatever. My theory is all these stadiums they're building will be empty in 10 years, or certainly before their 30 years and their mortgages come due, because a younger generation will be so immersed in the technology and that experience of maybe the same gameplay and whatever, that will become more real. Maybe sex will become more artificial and real, and the same thing too, so that will become more engaging with the endorphins and everything else releasing in the brain. So they will look at them, well, why go through and sit in a cold stadium and be distant, and I'm in the field. I'm there
in front of you
with Aaron Rodgers. I'm in Aaron Rodgers' being or whatever, rather than. So I see it as more engaging that they lose touch, just like the bread. They lose touch with it, and somebody says, no, the real thing is the sweat and the cold and the agony and the joy. And you detach from that because it's more convenient and thrilling, but I don't know.
On the other hand, from the other point of view, if you throw on VR goggles and you play with Aaron Rodgers, you're playing your video game, it's perceptively similar to being watching it from the stadium. You're still warm. I mean, you're
Well, that's what I'm saying. That will overtake. That will become the norm and the thrill and the more engaging, valuable, participative engagement, not going to the game and making your own bread.
Well, at this point, to answer your question, I think I wouldn't, if I was having a choice right now to go and to be downloaded into a machine, yes, I would miss my body, where I am now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do I miss being a frog at one point? No. Because at one point we have been all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we have evolved beyond all of that.
Let me change the question then. Think about like when we talked about the river world. What if you could have your 20-year-old body back?
Oh, you bet.
Me too.
And making all kinds of different choices with it.
But I think your question that you posed about 10 minutes ago, if we go back to, wouldn't you be enticed, for this, what I'll call benevolent paternalism, but that has an autocratic, you get back to your guarantee. I think, if what were the German people thinking in 1938 about their situation, and along was coming this, this autocratic but promising, you are superior and we're going to get the boogeyman and whatever, and we're going to do something. And I think they were giving up something because they were going to get this better thing that they were due, or told they were due. But in other cases, it's more benevolent, but it gets back to the guarantee, and when does it get twisted?
And there are always consequences.
Yeah, I mean, but don't you think even today, this drive for security and giving up what we would otherwise call, United,
Give something up,
our privacy, our rights, our freedom, but people are willing to make that trade-off when they get afraid enough.
But it's been the frog in the pot. It's been 1 degree it's 1 degree a year.
Yeah.
If we step back to 1950, 45, 60, people had a belief in America. They had a belief that they're looking out for us. This is my government. I have ownership of it. It's for me. As opposed to today's corporate perception of, it's a different perception completely. I'll die for my country now. It's like, I'm not dying for corporations, man.
Yeah, it's a different world.
I remember having a conversation with when I was a grad student with this older professor, and he was Oliver Stone's stuff was coming out about Kennedy and all that. He was like, oh, this is so important. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, he started talking about all these conspiracy theories, and I was like, I'm not really that interested in that. Why do you care about this? You're a philosophy professor. And he said, well, if this happened and this happened and this happened, that proves that the government was corrupt. And I looked at him and I was like, well, who the hell doesn't know that?
Yeah, because you need that for proof.
And I realized the gulf between his generation and mine, when like people were like, well, where were you when this happened? Because there was that loss, let's call it like a loss of innocence or something. Whereas if you grew up, in the 70s and 80s,
there was no
probably
crime.
didn't think that.
No one got kidnapped. There was no
Mm-hmm.
child crimes. Oh, no.
Well, there was, but it wasn't in your face.
Yeah, it wasn't reported. There was
Exactly.
actually more child crime than
It's
there
depends on where you-
Perception again. It's
Yes.
perception, yeah.
Absolutely.
And what is the news? What is
Because
I mean,
it's
The crime is actually lower now.
It is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is.
But if you were to listen to nothing but the news,
You would think,
Yeah.
the apocalypse is here.
Well, you're talking about VR. Ted
Yeah.
Williams wrote a whole series about VR. The Golden River, I think.
Was it called the Shadowlands? Because
The
it's a
Shadowlands.
4-book series.
It's a 4-book
Okay.
series, and it's called The Shadowlands. And it's based on a child that it gets immersed into the VR. And it's a brain connection. And you live in the VR.
It's a poltergeist. The little girl gets sucked in the
That's
TV.
Yeah, you live in the VR.
It's a different reality.
There's an ulterior motive at you
Well,
get
so-
into, but
yeah.
you live it. If you die in the VR, you die.
Okay.
And if you're in the VR and you never come out, your real body starves to death. So there's
I
there's
think
that.
Gibson's stuff was like that too, right? What was it? He was one of the.
Neuromancer and
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna look at some of those later on. The same sort of thing where you die in there.
But the VR is that real.
Yeah. So here's another sort of related question. I mean, where we are right now, we can see that robotics is just, getting involved in all these different things. We're close to having not just driverless cars, but driverless semi-trucks that will be carrying a lot of our freight and putting truckers out of business after a while. AIs are getting more and more sophisticated. We're talking about how it impacts medical things. We're probably going to see in our lifetime some pretty massive unemployment. And so the question, and we're going to see a lot of things farmed out to AI. So I guess the question is, well, if we have to have AI, do we want things sort of like these minds where they are pretty benevolent? Or, what's the alternative?
Who's going to build them?
Well, at a certain point,
They become
they start
self-building.
building themselves, right?
They'll
It's-
self-replicate.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about controlling, making sure that you control the situation.
It's all still coded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember I have a friend who's got his own computer company. He went to one semester of college, dropped out, and then started it up after high school. And I remember when he was, 2 decades ago, he was telling me about learning C++, and he was really excited about it because, unlike working with machine language or DOS or anything like that, where you're telling it what to do, you're telling the computer in effect how to code itself. And that was the start of that stuff. And now we're just light years beyond that. So a lot of this is going to be the AI
starting from core code. You're not writing your AI program from zero. You're taking bits and pieces from all these different places.
But how much of the code do we actually understand at any given point?
Well, that's the problem, is they've kind of lost control of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how? You remember back when we had computers that were very, from the current perspective, to almost infantile. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And how easy it was to keep track of what was going on because programs were only 100 lines long.
Yeah, you could write Pong on your Commodore 64.
How would a human being keep all of that in their head? What's going on with?
That's what they don't. They have sections that they pull in from other areas. Like if I need something to do this.
But that means there's nobody who's got an overall grasp of the system, right?
You could
Well,
show a virus
you've
that just
got-
replicates or something.
You've got your outline. It's planned.
Yeah.
Then you find ways to do it.
I mean, wouldn't it?
So you don't rewrite
Wouldn't it at
all
a certain
code that's
point
written.
just be easier to have some super sophisticated computer that could monitor all that sort of stuff? Let's
That
say.
goes back to guarantee, which is
Oh,
trust,
Trust.
Yeah.
and waiting for the malfunctions and the corruption,
Yeah.
wherever
Virus.
it comes from.
Even
Well,
within the culture world.
The hope is that the AI that we create would be
Benign.
Well,
would think,
altruistic.
would think differently. Would think differently than us. Because if we were the AI that was created
Yeah.
and it was some other lower form of life that created us, we all know what had happened to them. Gone. So if
We get
they're
bored with them, or
being that we're the ones that are creating it, if they're created in our image, I think we're screwed.
Yeah.
Well, look to
No.
windward, they talk about the culture has a board of humans that
Okay.
oversee what the minds are doing and what the hub is doing. And the stated purpose is to make sure that
everything stays on
that
track.
the AIs don't go too far.
There's something.
That they don't get off track.
There's one character in Consider Phlebas who's supposed to be able to understand. She's like one of 30 in the humans in the entire universe who can understand what the minds are doing as well. So I suppose that would be, but I mean, what if the minds start wiping them out?
Who teaches an AI the value of life?
Oh,
The AI that made it.
yeah, but then there you've got a sort of one step
Back.
back problem, right? How does that AI get it? You'd have to have some way of somehow modeling that. It's interesting when there was it's not the same issue, but there was a similar issue that came up in this series of science fiction stories, and they were in the 80s, about these gigantic tanks I think they were called bolos, and some of them were like a mile long. And what they started doing with them is giving them pain receptors, so that when they'd start getting hit with a lot of damage, they'd actually like start to take care of themselves and not get blown up because they're seeking it out. And then, of course, the bolos fairly quickly realize that this is a terrible thing that they have pain receptors, and they start eventually they sort of escape their programming and all that. What you'd have to do would be almost like the opposite of that, where somehow you would give them the ability to feel pleasure, and I don't know how a machine feels pleasure, some sort of satisfaction, like all the things being the way they should be when human beings are happy.
Sort of back to hedonism again, but then
hedonism is fairly easy to model. Like if you think about, you want to make a human society, right, and have the machine run it. Well, if you have like a hedonistic model for how the society ought to run, that's pretty simple. Just like give people surveys every once in a while. When things just look in their brain centers and see whether pleasure centers are lighting up, and as opposed to pain centers. You can do that with a sort of utilitarian calculation. When it comes to higher values,
okay, yes, we've got too many
really
people, and to
tough.
make the most people happy,
Yeah.
we're going to have to destroy North America to free up that.
It's how do you define the value?
That's one of the issues.
Value.
But is your machine self-conscious or not?
Well, these are.
Sure. Well, there was a recent Doctor Who episode in the new season where they're at a planet that was established to have this utopian human community, and the robots were programmed, the AI was programmed that they needed to keep people happy, that the idea was to be happy.
Yeah.
Someone dies and someone grieves. Well, they're not happy.
So nobody can die, I guess.
And they start killing people off because they're not happy. And their programming is to keep people happy.
But that's like us in
And
pets.
they end up wiping out the entire colony. The AI does.
Yeah.
Because they can't compute the grief.
So they're eliminating pain.
They're eliminating pain.
Yeah.
They're eliminating
removing
pain to make people happy. And
Well, it's a good utilitarian calculation.
It is.
you calculate. They calculate it and say, well, our goal is to keep people happy. They're not
I
happy.
think part of what happens in those sort of stories too is it points to the fact that there would have to be some sort of governing factor where because otherwise the risk is an AI everything fits its model, and it's like, all right, now I'm going to do this, and it sets up a feedback loop, right? So like the one that you're talking about, everybody's getting killed off, that makes people unhappy, we've got to kill them some more, until there's nothing left. I suppose that's something that's part of the way we humans work, is we have these other things that come in and say, hey, knock it off, dummy, take a step back and look at what the hell's going on here. And that can sometimes be our own self-regulation, but a lot of times it's other people kind of intervening and saying, what the hell are you doing here?
Societal pressures, norms. You got hit when you hit others when you were younger. You realized the consequences. So, all of that went into building us up. But if you just go, okay, I'm turning you on. I get why Hawkins is scared.
Well, maybe in this case, maybe they're not just turned on right away, right? They go through a bunch of trial steps. I mean, in this one, there's a drone, right? And he wants to work for Contact Special Circumstances. Contact is the military arm. Special Circumstances is like military intelligence. But he turns out to be a real jerk, right? And nobody wants to work with him, so they kick him out. Maybe there's something like that for the minds. I don't know.
Why do we, as a culture, want to replace ourselves? That's what I want to understand. By inventing AI, what is the desire to replace
I think some of it's convenience.
ourselves?
I think it's to make life easier.
You want
searching for
By
the comfort
replacing
zone.
yourself.
There's another thing too.
Chris, gradually, it's like having artificial limbs.
Oh, I know. But it comes down to one of those things. Just because you can, should you?
It's money. Amazon and
Well,
Google
I
are the ones
understand that.
are
I
gonna make it.
understand,
Yeah.
like the mechanization
They're gonna
and doing
make it.
things through like robotics and things. But when you're actually talking about an intelligent being to replace humans as a human, and not as working as a machine or anything else, but just to actually replace yourself. What is I don't see the purpose.
To replace yourself,
Push the edges of science.
Well, okay, let's
You can push it, but then-
extrapolate
but
it.
then
What's
you're-
the purpose of Earth in the universe? We are limited now, human beings, to Earth. So what is
Yeah.
the purpose of Earth in the grand scheme of the universe? Does it have any? Or is it just a speck, irrelevant, and we're ascribing too much purpose to our own
To ourselves.
selves, as if
Well,
we're controlling something
We're
beyond
relevant to
Earth?
ourselves.
Yeah. To go back to your
Imagination.
to your question about why was brought in, why technology, right? So back in ancient Greece, Aristotle observed. He called slaves ensouled tools, right? And when we hear that, we go, "Oh, that doesn't sound very nice," right? But if you flip it on its side, he talks about, well, we wouldn't need slaves if we had, looms where the shuttle wove itself. And then people wouldn't have to do these crappy jobs. We wouldn't have to have these power dynamics where one person is in charge and the other person is stuck doing what they do. And so one of the big dreams of technology is that it will liberate human beings from oppressive power relations. Now, it usually doesn't turn out to be that way. Right? We create new ones.
If they're doing everything and you're just sitting around, you have no purpose, you have no usefulness. Why are you here?
Yeah, that's another issue.
You just want to sit here
what do
and
you-
scrabble around for crumb resources because there's nothing here?
Back to the culture.
But here's the thing. If you, let's say it worked, right? And we freed everything up, and we did it with the people that we are today. So let's say it's contemporary America, and boom, the technology takes off. And let's even say that like Apple and Google and Microsoft, and Amazon are driving it, but suddenly each of their, CEOs and even the shareholders suddenly get a wild hair and they're like, let's do this for the public good. And so we're just sort of dreaming here. Now, what would we do with our time? I know I would certainly have no problem filling up my
Well, I
time.
can fill time, but how do you get money to buy anything?
Well, that's the thing.
Socialism.
This is a post-scarcity society.
You don't have
So
to
the
do
way that
that.
it's set up, everything you want gets
You
provided
But
to you.
I'm talking kind of,
You just want more.
we just went to the.
Well,
If you want to know what utopia is,
yeah.
it's look around you. 100 years ago, this is utopia.
Yeah.
100 years ago, people would think, God, if I could only
Not
have
die.
Indoor
Well,
plumbing.
Yeah, if I could only
It may
have
be
this giant
utopia for
house
us,
Yeah.
but there's
and
groups
just
of whole
go to
groups
the
of people.
store and
Turn a faucet on.
work 40 hours a week and get
Yeah.
all the money that I would need
Yeah, you
to
can still
ever.
die
That's,
of gallbladder.
that's
Well, that's-
perfect. I would never be unhappy for as long as I live.
But not
I still
everyone in
want
the
more.
world
I
has
still want
those
more.
things. Not everybody in the world has those things.
Well, yeah.
True.
There are lots of places
Although,
where people
you know,
don't have water.
True.
They don't have
but
electricity.
My point is, we still aren't
But
like.
the stuff.
We're still not like, okay, well, here
Didn't
we
make
are,
us
now we're
happy.
done.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
And
still thinking in 20 years we could, and this is a real possibility. It's been written about from 3 different people I've listened to their books. On a jobless economy. That's
so that's the question. Yeah, what are we
it'll
gonna
be
do?
a jobless economy. So then the big deal, like when they're sitting in Davos, they're not talking about they're talking about what the hell are we going to do with all these people because
Yeah.
there's going to be no way for them to earn any money. And government is just not going to pour stuff on you when nobody's paying taxes because there's no money there.
Well, the idea behind this
And what the
is
heck do you
that
do?
there'd be so much resources and wealth
But that's
generated
science
by the
fiction, I'm talking
technology.
reality.
So what are we going to
Long
do
term,
in
yeah.
our?
But I mean, but
if
if you really looked at that, if
imagine.
you did not have a science fiction thing
that's
on
something
top of it,
that's something that's a real pressing.
but that is a real
problem.
reality
Yeah.
here, and so
What are
that
we going to do when unemployment is 40%?
it is probably going to get higher than that.
And we are a scarcity society.
Yeah, so there's a couple different answers to that. One is that we're all going to become artisans.
Yeah, but
And we're all,
that's
and we're all going to
gonna be
like
cross-dressed, right?
I don't know, weave cozies for cell phones, and you'll cut hair in a special way, and
No, that's actually what they've
now,
been saying.
I don't see that. I don't see how that's going to happen. Because you still have to have money exchanging hands somehow.
You'd exchanging, bartering, good. I mean,
Well,
what would you
realistically,
do?
the culture would look over at the Andromeda galaxy and be like,
Oh, you mean spaceflight? As
well,
a layout?
I mean, so they've
Start
got the
over.
galaxy, right?
Yeah.
They've got everything that they want. And they'd look over there and say, well, I'll bet, what would it be like to have that too?
It's interesting because in Philip K. Dick's, some of his stories, where they're colonizing other either within the planetary system or other planetary systems. There's this contrast drawn between like the colonies where life has meaning and stuff like that, and then crappy Earth where these people are left behind. Like the world, the Blade Runner is like that. You know, the androids dream of electric sheep. The people who are left behind struggle with depression and all of these. You know, the buildings are mostly abandoned, so there's this. You can hear like the sound of nobody being there, and that gets people riled up. So it could be a solution, you know, go out and search of new...
I'm not saying it's a solution, I'm just saying it's what we do, you know, it's what we do.
Going out for new frontiers?
Yeah, I mean...
There's always more.
It's not like we're just sitting here now like, oh, we made it. Let's just go out and...
Fish all day.
Yeah, we could.
I wouldn't mind doing that myself. But that's because I'm a busy person, you know. Maybe if I did it for a year, I'd be like, well, this is crap. I don't want to do this.
Yeah, back to work.
Banks does have...
And the reason we're going to create it is, I mean, if we want to repair all your DNA so that you live to be, you know, 500, we can't do that. We have to create something that can do it. And that's the only way to do it.
Well, there's growing organs and things. That'll be in 10 years where they're going to be.
But try and replace your brain.
The brain is the thing that's kind of holding things back.
Yeah.
You can have all the rest working pretty good, but the brain...
Yeah.
They're doing wonders with 3D printers.
They are.
They are?
They are.
I know.
Oh, no, I mean, they're printing
What were you going to say
organs.
about...
I was going to say,
HP.
he has a civilization-wide version of permanently gone fishing, which is the sublimation, which
Oh yeah.
they
That's
kind of just
true.
hint at it. And it's kind of
True.
interesting because then the culture is consciously choosing to keep working in the real world rather
Yeah.
than retiring. But obviously he doesn't talk much about the sublimation, at least in the books I've read.
Yeah.
He finally does talk about it in his last book, The
Oh,
Hydrogen
boy.
Sonata. It's very good.
Haven't read it.
I know. And the funny thing is, without spoiling anything, he very briefly talks about how a very rare few people have come back from the subliming, and nobody's come back saying, "Oh, it's awful, don't do it." They're all agreed it's pretty cool. So, but they can't say why.
Oh, does he say what their motives for coming back are?
Just to check in.
Curious.
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah, just to
Gotta get sober once in a while.
You know, I mean, the other side is you find purpose by joining Contact, and then you've got like adventures to go on, and you might get killed, you know, you have to experience hardship and all that. And the Contact, this is one of the other things I did want to talk about. So if we have a utopia like this, they still need some people to get their hands dirty and to like be the buffer from the the other mean empires who are going to interfere with things. And then you've got this special circumstances who are even more into that sort of thing. And that seems like a way in which people could have renewed meaning in their life. A lot of other characters wind up sort of working for them. They're not actually part of the culture, but they end up working for them, or they work for people that are against the culture. And these sort of problems don't occur to them. It's really interesting because in the first one, the main character, he's working for the enemy civilization that's actually beating the culture at the start, and he's doing it because he doesn't like what the culture stands for. And he gives a lot of, there's quite a few arguments and monologues in the thing about what's wrong with that kind of society.
And he sees the alternative, and
Well, the alternative isn't a
These guys
great
aren't so
alternative. It's these sort of like battle crazy people.
oh yeah. So he's like, well, I guess the culture wasn't so bad. Like,
Yeah. Well, oftentimes their alternatives are not between two ideals. So.
Well, Look to Windward is especially fun to read because you spend a lot of time on an orbital, kind of following like the life of what it's like there, and it's pretty nice.
Well, I imagine
Yeah,
so.
I
I mean,
mean-
if you've got unlimited resources.
Yeah, but they don't even think of it like that. They don't even think of it like unlimited resources. I think that it would be completely alien for them to think like I'm gonna have lobster all the time. They seem to enjoy just being, not necessarily being to excess,
Yeah.
but just like enjoying.
Well, it seems like
They write symphonies and they
and they are doing some creative
and they
work,
create
right?
some sports that they
Yeah.
can.
Well,
I mean, the other thing too is they're all growing up in an environment that renders them better adjusted without the sort of childhood traumas or whatever that we have to work through or suffer from.
well, in Accession, one of the drones spends 100 years working on a sand sculpture.
Wow.
And the idea is why? Why not?
Yeah,
There is no purpose. He just wanted to do it.
you'd think though there would have to be like some, as you're doing it moment to moment, there must be some enjoyment of
Well, yeah.
how this is happening, how that's happening. One of the other things that came up a bit was the genetic enhancement thing. I mean, if we're talking about it in terms of like our society and what we're going to do with massive unemployment, we probably don't want it because we don't want more people around longer, right? But in a society like this, they're modifying the human genome to do all sorts of cool, crazy stuff, like the capacity, for example, to produce your own drugs in your head. And then think about it. It's not just like about getting high.
Yeah.
It's about like being able to, that you need something to, like, think about adrenaline. If we could produce adrenaline whenever we needed it.
To enhance concentration. and
Yeah.
things,
Would we do it? If we knew that we had certain things that would make us more attentive and, like, say, listening to a symphony, would we? I know I would do that because my mind wanders all the time. I'd use it in reading too.
Don't you think that